Existential fatigue. It is the deepest human malady, the slow, silent death of the soul. That feeling drove Michael Thomas to the brink of giving up on life entirely. But in one brutal, terrifying night, a gift was delivered, not death, but a sacred map. A path back to the origin, which leads through 9 episodes and the 7 houses of the soul. If you are ready to stop wandering and commit to the answers, this is your roadmap. To ensure you follow every crucial step of Michael's journey, subscribe to Neo Insight now and let the story begin. Who is Kryon? Kryon is a gentle, loving entity who is currently on the earth to help us move into the high energy of what we call our new age. Kryon's words have changed lives and brought love and light into some of the darkest places of our inner being. The storyline for the journey home was inspired by Kryon and written by Carroll. Introduction. On December 8, 1996, Kryon sat before more than 500 people in Laguna Hills, California, at the close of an afternoon seminar. In a storytelling session that lasted over an hour, the journey of Michael Thomas was presented, a trek born of the desire of an earth-weary human to join his spiritual family and go home. The very name Michael Thomas represents the incredibly sacred and holy attributes of the Archangel Michael, and also the old energy properties of Thomas the Doubter. This combination represents many of us who feel we are spiritual beings, but often doubt our abilities to move forward into a new millennium that has increasing spiritual demands or fear-based challenges. Michael's journey home slowly reveals an adventure through 7 colorful houses, each occupied by a grand angel. Each house represents an attribute of the new age and carries with it wisdom, teaching, humor, and insight into what it is God wants us to know about ourselves. We also get a glimpse of the way things work as we move through the new paradigm of our new age. Progressing to a moving and surprising end, Michael Thomas's journey reveals to humans a package of loving instructions coming from a spiritual source that constantly desires to wash our feet. If you have ever asked God, "What is it you want me to know?" this may be it. Join Michael Thomas in his exciting journey. It may remind you of your own. Michael Thomas. The black plastic pieces flew in all directions as Mike pushed his box a bit too hard against the cubicle wall of his sales office. It was another instance where an inanimate object bore the brunt of Mike's growing anger at his situation. Suddenly, a head popped up through the dusty leaves of a plastic plant to his left. "Everything okay over there?" asked John from the next cubicle. The walls of each cubicle were just high enough to allow a person to pretend he had an office of his own. Mike had placed several tall items on his desk. This had the effect of hiding the fact that his coworkers were only about 4 feet from him at all times, all of them sharing in the pretense that they were alone in their spaces, having private conversations. The glow of white fluorescent light from the myriad naked fixtures above the cubicles bathed Mike and his peers in the kind of false illumination only found in institutions and industry. It seemed to absorb all the red in the visual spectrum, turning everyone pale, even though they lived in sun-drenched California. Years without direct sunlight made Mike seem doubly pale. "Nothing that a trip to the Bahamas wouldn't cure," replied Mike, without looking at the plant that had John's head showing through it. John shrugged and returned to his phone conversation. Even as the words escaped his mouth, Mike knew that he would never see the Bahamas on the salary of an order taker working in the coal mine, as the employees called the sales factory they worked for. He started, picking up pieces of the plastic tray that he had shattered, and he sighed, something he found himself doing a lot lately. What was he here for? Why didn't he have the energy or the incentive to make his life better? His gaze took in the dumb-looking stuffed bear that he had bought himself. It said, "Hug me." Next to it was his favorite Far Side cartoon, something about the bluebird of happiness escaping Ned, the cartoon character. Instead, he was being visited by the chicken of depression. It didn't matter how many smiling faces or cartoons he tacked up on the cubicle walls. Mike still felt stuck. He was glued to an existence that resembled the workings of an office copy machine, each day duplicated over and over again without any purpose. The frustration and helplessness that he felt made him angry and depressed, and it was beginning to show. His supervisor had even mentioned it. Michael Thomas was in his mid-30s. Like many others in his office, he was in survival mode. It was the only job he could find where he didn't have to care about what he did very much. He could simply disengage for 8 hours a day, go home, sleep, try to pay his bills on the weekend, and go back to work again on Mondays. Mike realized that he only knew the names of 4 people in this Los Angeles office of over 30 individuals. He just didn't care, and he had been at this for over a year, ever since the emotional breakup that had shattered his life forever. He never shared his memories with anyone, but they ran through his head almost nightly. Mike lived alone, except for his solitary fish. He had wanted a cat, but the landlord wouldn't allow it. He knew he was playing victim, but his self-esteem was at an all-time low, and he continued to massage the wound that was his life, purposefully keeping it open, hurt, and bleeding so he could recall it at will. There wasn't anything else he felt he could do, and he wasn't certain he had the energy to change things even if he had wanted to. He had named the fish Cat just for fun, and he would speak to it each time he came home or left for work. "Keep the faith, Cat," Mike would say to his finned friend on the way out. Of course, the fish never said anything in return. Over 6 feet tall, Mike was somewhat imposing until he smiled. His grin carried with it a charm that melted all prejudgments anyone might have had upon seeing his large frame. It was not by chance that he found himself working on the phone, where customers could not see him. Rather, it was a purposeful way of denying himself his best attribute, almost like a self-imposed prison, allowing him to wallow in the melodrama of his current situation. He excelled at people skills, but he seldom used them except when necessary at work. Mike did not cultivate friends willingly, and the opposite sex didn't even exist for him in his current mindset, although they would have liked to. "Mike," his male coworkers would say, "when is the last time you got lucky? You need to get out there and find a good woman. Get your mind off your life." Then they would go home to their families, dogs, and loving children, and sometimes a fish too. But Mike couldn't fathom how to start the process of rebuilding his lost love life. It wasn't worth it, he decided. "I found my partner early," he would say to himself, except that she didn't know it. He had been very much in love, with all the expectations that go with it. She, on the other hand, had just been having fun. When that fact was finally brought home, it was as if Mike's entire future had shriveled up and disappeared. He had loved her with the singular passion that he believed he would feel only once in his life. He had spent it all on her, but she had thrown it away. Raised by his parents on a farm in the small town of Blue Earth, Minnesota, Mike escaped what he felt was a dead-end situation, that of growing crops that were either purchased by a foreign country or were stored indefinitely in large silos due to an overabundance of grain. Very early on, he knew that farming was not for him. It didn't seem to be valued even by his own country. What good was it? Besides, he couldn't stand the smell of it all, and he wanted to work with people instead of animals or tractors. He did well in school and was absolutely stellar in anything that involved interaction with others. Ending up in sales was a natural for Mike, and he had no problem at all finding good jobs, selling a multitude of products and services he could represent with honesty. People loved to buy things from Michael Thomas. When he looked back at what his now-deceased parents had given him, he realized that the one thing that had stuck was his belief in God. A lot of good it was doing right now. He often thought bitterly. Mike was an only child, and his parents, his beloved mom and dad, had been killed in a car accident just before his 21st birthday. He still mourned them greatly and always kept photos around to remind him of their lives and deaths. Through everything, even now, Mike kept going to church and at least went through the motions of worship. When asked about his spiritual health by the minister, Mike openly admitted his faith and the belief in his spiritual nature. He was certain that God was just and loving, but not really in his corner at the moment, or even for the last few years, for that matter. Mike often prayed for a better situation, but he had little optimism that things would really change. With the ruddy complexion of his father, Mike was not really handsome, but attractive in a rugged sort of way. Women found him irresistible. His flashing smile, blonde hair, tall frame, square jaw, and deep blue eyes were captivating. Those who had good intuition also knew that Mike was a man of integrity, and they trusted him almost instantly. He'd had many opportunities to take inappropriate advantage of situations, both in business and in romance, but he'd never done so. Mike was a product of farm consciousness, one of the only valuable attributes that followed him from the cold country of his upbringing. He couldn't lie. He understood intuitively when others needed assistance. He opened doors for people coming into and out of the supermarket, respected and spoke to elders, and always gave the down-and-out men and women in the street the dollar bills they asked for, even if he suspected it might be wasted on alcohol. He felt that everyone should work together to make things better, and he never understood why people didn't speak to each other in his adopted town or seldom even met their own neighbors. Perhaps it was because the weather was so nice that people never needed help. How ironic, he thought. Mike's only female role model was his mom, therefore. He treated all women with the kind of respect he had known for the wonderful, sensitive woman whom he missed greatly. Part of his misery now was the seeming betrayal of this respect in the only real relationship he had ever had. Actually, Mike's experience had only been a result of culture clash. What was expected from one person was not what was given, and vice versa. The California girl who had broken his heart was only following what she believed was her cultural truth about love, but Mike hadn't seen it that way. He had been taught differently, and he didn't have tolerance for other ideas about love. And so it I asked that our story really begins. Here was Michael Thomas at his lowest ebb, coming home on a Friday night ready to greet his studio-style two-room apartment. 2 rooms that included the bathroom. Mike had stopped at the store to pick up the meager groceries he needed to exist for the next few days. Long ago, he had found that he could make his money go very far indeed if he bought the generic brands and used his coupons wisely. But his real key to frugality? Don't eat much. Mike purchased packaged items that didn't need to be cooked. Then he didn't have to use the stove or pay for the electricity. This practice left him unfulfilled, somewhat hungry, and always without a dessert to look forward to, which seemed to fit his self-imposed role of victim just fine. He also found that if he ate everything right from the package over the sink, he didn't have to wash any dishes. He hated washing dishes and often bragged to John, his coworker and only friend, about how he had solved the problem. Knowing Mike's habits, John commented in jest that before long Mike might find a way to do everything, even going without an apartment, by living at the nearest homeless shelter. John had laughed and slapped Mike on the back when he said it. Mike, however, had actually considered it. By the time I got home from the store, it was dark. A heavy mist had been trying to turn into rain most of the day, and was still at it, turning everything slick and shiny in the artificial yellow rays of the streetlight, reflected on the apartment steps. Glad to be living in Southern California, Mike often remembered the hardships of the winters in Minnesota where he had grown up. All during his youth, he'd had a passion for anything from California. He swore to himself that he had to escape the punishment of weather that everyone else simply took for granted. Why would anyone choose to live where you could die in 10 minutes from exposure? He would ask his mom. She would smile and just look at him, then say, "Families stay where their roots are, you know, besides, it's safe here." That was her familiar sermon about how dangerous Los Angeles was and how nice Minnesota was. That only made sense if you didn't add death by freezing. Mike couldn't convince her that the danger of earthquakes was like a lottery. It might happen in your lifetime, and it might not. Grueling Minnesota winters, however, with a norm every year, a cyclical occurrence that you could absolutely count on. Needless to say, Mike escaped his country home as soon as he was done with high school, moving to California for his college years. He had used his sales abilities to personally finance everything he did. Now he wished he had stayed home for a while, to be with his mom and dad during the years before the accident. He had lost precious times with his parents in his quest to escape the cold, or so he thought. He felt selfish in retrospect. In the dim light, Mike trudged up the front steps to his ground floor apartment and fiddled around with his keychain. He balanced his grocery bag and slid the key into the lock. The key went in normally, But that's when, on that Friday night, normal stopped for Michael Thomas. On the other side of the door was a gift, potentially a part of Mike's destiny, something that would change his life forever. Due to a warped door frame, Mike had learned to use his body weight to help open the stubborn entrance to his lodgings. The result was that the door always burst open forcefully. Mike had perfected the method of balancing a bag of groceries on one hip, slipping the key into the lock, turning it, and pushing with his foot all at the same time. This maneuver required an awkward hip movement, and although it got the job done, his friend John had commented that it looked very funny indeed. The obstinate door flew open with the impact of Mike's hip, startling the thief, who was busy in the darkened room. With the swiftness of a frightened cat and years of experience with the unexpected, the uninvited man, a good foot smaller than Mike, instantly darted forward, grabbed Mike's arm, and yanked him into the room. Since Mike's balance was in the funny mode of opening his sticky door, he was already in full forward motion. The thief's action easily tumbled Mike into the apartment and smashed his large frame to the floor, where the groceries were launched against the far wall with enough force to break the seals on the packages. Just before he hit the floor, a shocked Mike, with all his bodily alarms going off at once, heard the door slam behind him, with the thief still inside. Mike caught a quick glimpse of the broken glass his face was headed for, a result of the shattered window that had allowed the smaller man to enter. These are often the times, recounted after the fact, when people say that things slowed down in their minds. This was not the case for Michael Thomas. The seconds screamed by in a blur, compressing time and creating overwhelming panic. The man who had broken into the apartment was determined to continue his quest to remove the apartment's television and stereo, and he certainly didn't care what happened to his victim. Hardly had Mike fallen to the floor when the man was on top of him with hands like a sweaty vice gripping Mike's throat. The man's eyes were wide and inches from his own. Mike could feel and smell the hot, foul breath in his face and the weight of the man's rump on his stomach. He instinctively reacted as any person would who was about to die, and mustered up a move one might witness in a B-movie. Despite his disorientation, and with all his force, he quickly threw his head forward, smashing against the thief's head. It worked. The assailant, surprised by the force of the move, released his grasp long enough for Mike to violently roll to the side and try to stand up. Before he could right himself, however, the thief again attacked, this time with a strong blow to Mike's midsection. Mike was actually lifted up by the impact, then fell back and to the left, brutally connecting with something big that he dimly realized was his aquarium. With a hellish noise, the cabinet, the aquarium, and the solitary fish joined the groceries against the back wall of the small room. Mike was in pain and without breath. He gasped, his lungs on fire from oxygen deprivation, as his widening eyes watched a boot that seemed as big as Montana descend upon him. His assailant was grinning now. It happened too fast. The boot found its mark. Mike felt and heard the few bones in his throat and neck crunch in a horrible way. He gasped in horror, knowing absolutely that his air passage was gone, and perhaps his spine too. His entire body reacted to the snapping and popping of his mutilated neck. Shock tore through his consciousness as the reality of the situation began to sink in. This was it, death was near. He tried to cry out, but his voice box wouldn't work. There was no more air for Mike, and things quickly went dark. All was quiet. The thief hurried to conclude his night's work, unconcerned about the very still man on the floor, when he was again startled by a racket at the much-abused apartment door. "What's going on in there? Is everything all right?" A neighbor was frantically pounding his fist on the uncompromising wood. The thief cursed his luck and grudgingly moved toward the broken window. He punched out some remaining glass shards to clear his way and easily slipped through. Mike's neighbor, who had never actually met Mike, heard the sound of more glass breaking inside and decided to try the doorknob. Finding the door unlocked, he entered to find the apartment trashed and a man fleeing through the broken window. Moving silently in the near dark to avoid the TV and stereo oddly stacked in the middle of the room, the neighbor snapped on a light switch, and a bare bulb came to life on the ceiling. "Oh my God!" He heard his voice break in shock. In a split second, The man was on the phone dialing for help. An unconscious and critically injured Michael Thomas lay on the floor. The room was quiet now, the only sound being that of a flopping fish 2 feet from Mike's head. Cat was wriggling among the lettuce and pre-cooked noodles from the spilled groceries, an unsavory mix now beginning to redden from the slowly growing puddle of Mike's BLO. The vision. Mike woke up in unfamiliar surroundings. Then, with a flash of returning consciousness, he remembered everything. His eyes darted around, only to discern that he was not in his apartment or a local hospital. Everything was quiet. In fact, the silence was so overwhelming that it unnerved him. There was simply no sound other than his own breathing. No cars passing by. No hum of an air conditioner. No anything. Mike managed to sit up slightly. He looked down to find himself lying on a strange-looking white cot-like bed. There were no covers, but he was wearing exactly what he'd had on at the time of the attack. He reached up and touched his neck. His last conscious thought was that it had been mangled, but to his relief, he could detect no sign of injury. Mike actually felt good. He gently poked himself in several places. Strangely enough, there was no injury or soreness at all. But that silence, it was driving him crazy that there was no other stimulus to his ears. The lighting was odd, too. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. It was brilliant white, a white so void of color that it hurt his eyes. He decided to examine his surroundings more closely. This was spooky. He wasn't in a room, and he wasn't outside. There was only him, the cot, and a white floor that extended as far as he could see. Mike lay back down. He knew what had happened. He was dead. It didn't take a rocket scientist to understand that what he was observing and feeling didn't add up correctly in the real world. But why did he still have his body? Mike decided to try something silly. He pinched himself to see if there was pain. He flinched and uttered a loud ow. "How do you feel, Mike?" asked a soothing male voice. Mike instantly looked in the direction of the voice and saw a sight he would not forget for the rest of his life. Mike felt an angelic presence, a feeling of great love. He always went for how he felt first, then on to what he saw. It was his habit to describe his experiences in this manner when asked, and at this moment, he saw a figure in white that was in some way ominous, but splendorous at the same time. Were those wings, he wondered? How trite. Mike smiled at the vision in front of him, having difficulty believing it was real. "Am I dead?" Mike inquired stoically, but with respect to the being before him. "Not at all," said the figure, who approached Mike. "It's just a dream, Michael Thomas." The apparition came closer, seemingly without walking. Mike saw a veiled, blurred face on the giant man in front of his bed, but somehow it made him feel comforted, safe, and cared for. It was all he could do to continue speaking. The feeling was wonderful. The figure was dressed in white, but he wasn't wearing a robe, exactly, or a suit. The garment seemed somehow to be alive, and it moved with the man as though it were skin. His face was the same, indistinct. Mike couldn't see any folds, buttons, or creases where clothing ended and skin began, yet the odd apparel was not tight. It was gossamer flowing, sometimes actually glowing and indistinct. Adding to the vision was that Mike's eyes tended to blend the white of the man's attire into the incredibly white background of his surroundings. It was actually hard to see where the figure ended and the background started. "Where am I?" Sounds like a stupid question, but I guess I am entitled to ask that, Mike said in a very small voice. "You are in a sacred place," the figure replied. "A place of your own making, and a place that is filled with great love. That is what you are feeling right now." The angelic figure bowed to Mike, and it seemed to fill the area with even more light than was already there. "And you are?" Mike asked respectfully, his voice shaking. "You probably guessed. I'm an angel." Mike didn't blink an eye. He knew that the vision in front of him was telling the absolute truth. The situation, however odd, was extremely real. Mike felt all of it clearly. Are all angels male? Mike regretted the question as soon as it had left his lips. What a dumb thing to ask. This was obviously a very special time. If it was a dream, then it was as real as anything he had ever experienced. "I'm only what you wish to see," Michael Thomas. I am not of human form, so what you see before you has been presented in order to make you comfortable. But no, all angels are not male. We are actually neither gender. We don't all have wings either. Mike smiled again, realizing that perhaps what he was seeing was of his own making. What do you really look like? Asked Mike, who was feeling a bit more free to speak normally to this loving being. And why is your face hidden? It was a valid question under the circumstances. My shape would astound you, and at the same time you would feel an odd remembrance upon seeing it, for it is the way you look, also, when you are not on Earth. It simply is beyond description, so I will continue to look like this for now. As for my face, you shall see it soon enough. When I'm not on Earth, Mike probed. Earth existence is temporary, but you know that, don't you? I know who you are, Michael Thomas. You are a spiritual man, and you understand the eternal nature of humans. Many times you have given thanks for your spiritual nature, and those of us on my side have heard every word. Mike was silent. Yes, he had prayed in church and at home, but to really think it all was heard clearly was just a bit too startling to grasp. This entity, in his dream, knew him? Where do you come from? Asked Mike. Home. The loving entity now seemed to be glowing directly in front of Mike's small cot. The figure cocked its head to the side and was patient while Mike took it all in. Mike felt tingles go up and down his spine. He had the strong sense that there was great truth standing here before him, and that he had only to ask and wonderful knowledge would pour out. You are right. The angel responded to Mike's inner musings. What you do right now will change your future. You are feeling it, aren't you? You can read my thoughts. Mike inquired somewhat sheepishly. No, we can feel them. Your heart is linked to the whole, you know, and we respond when you need us. This was getting spooky. I only see you. The angel laughed, and the sound was spectacular. What energy that laughter had. Mike felt every cell in his body resound with the humor the angel expressed. Everything the angel did was fresh, larger than life, and somehow there a wonderful remembrance of something deep within Michael's subconscious. Mike was stunned at the sound, but said nothing. I speak to you with the voice of one, but I represent the voices of many, stated the angel as he held out his arms, letting the odd garment/skin flow and undulate from the move. There are many in service to each human, Michael. This will become obvious to you if you choose it to be. I do choose. Mike shouted the words. How could an invitation like that be ignored? Then Mike felt a little embarrassed, as if he were acting like a child in front of a matinee star. He was silent for some time and watched the angel move slightly up and down, as if he were on some kind of a mini hydraulic lift. He again mused to himself how much of what he was seeing might be the result of his desire to perceive things a certain way from watching movies, attending church, or looking at great works of art. Things were silent again. Oh, that silence. The angel was obviously not going to impart information unless Mike started asking questions. May I ask you about my situation? Mike asked respectfully. Is this really a dream? It seems so real. What is a human dream, Michael Thomas? The angel moved slightly closer. It is a visit into your biological and spiritual mind that enables you to receive information from my side of things, sometimes metaphorically. Did you know that? A dream may not seem like your reality, but it is actually closer to God's reality than anything you experience regularly. Those times your father and mother came to you in your dreams. How did that make you feel? Did it seem real? It was. Remember the week after the accident when they visited you? You wept for days in response. It was their reality. Their messages to you were real. They continue to share love with you even to this day, Michael, because, like you, they are eternal also. As far as questions about your situation, why do you think you are having this dream? It is the sole purpose for this visit, and it is timely and appropriate. Mike was pleased by the long stream of conversation from this beautiful one, who seemed increasingly familiar to him. Will I come out of this situation okay? I believe I am horribly injured and that I am unconscious somewhere, perhaps dying. Depends, said the angel. On what? Inquired Michael. What is it you really want, Michael? Asked the angel in a loving manner. Tell us what it is you really want. Be careful with your answer, Michael Thomas, for the energy of God is often literal. Besides, we know what you know. You cannot fool your own nature. Michael wanted to be honest with his answer. The situation was becoming more real with each passing moment. He indeed remembered the vivid dreams he had about his parents right after their accident. They had come to him together in the few times he could sleep in that horrible week, and they had hugged and loved him. They told him that it was their appropriate time to leave, whatever that meant. Mike hadn't accepted that it was. His parents had also told him that part of the arrangement of death was to give him a gift in their passing. He always wondered what the gift was. But then again, it was only a dream, or was it? The angel said it was real. This current experience certainly seemed real to Mike, so perhaps the parental messages were, too, just like this angel was, or is. This dream or vision is confusing. He thought with frustration. What is it I want? Mike asked himself. He thought about his life and all the things that had happened to him in the past year. He knew what he wanted, but he felt it was wrong to ask for it. It does not suit your magnificence to withhold your innermost desires, mused the angel to Michael. Drat, Mike said to himself. The angel again knows what I am about. There is nothing I can hide. If you already know, then why are you here to ask me? Mike asked, and what's this about me being magnificent? For the very first time, the angel showed something other than a smile. It was a feeling of honor, of respect. You have no idea what and who you are, Michael Thomas, the angel said seriously. You think I am beautiful? You should see what you look like. Someday you will. As far as me knowing your thoughts and feelings, of course I do. I am here as part of your support, and therefore I am with you in many very personal ways. It is my honor to appear before you, but it is your intent that will bring change at this time. You have the choice to tell me, or to not tell me, what it is you desire most at this moment as a human. The answer has to come from your own heart, spoken out loud for all to hear, even for you to hear. What you do at this point will make a difference for many. Mike took it all in. He would have to speak his truth, even though it might not be what the angel wanted to hear. Mike contemplated for a moment. Then he spoke. I want to go home. I'm tired of this life as a human. There, he had said it. He wanted out. But I don't want to bail out of something important to God's plan. Mike was passionate. Life seemed so meaningless, but I was taught that I was created in the image of God for a purpose. What can I do? The angel moved to the side of the cot so that Mike could see him better. It was amazing, this vision, dream, or whatever it was. He swore he could smell violets, or was that lilac? Why flowers? The angel actually had smell. He was more beautiful the closer he got. Michael was also aware that the angel was pleased with the dialogue. He could feel it, even though he could not discern any expression on the angel's face. Tell me, Michael Thomas, is your intent pure? Do you really want what God wants? You want to go home, but you are also somehow aware of a greater plan, so you don't wish to disappoint us or act spiritually inappropriate. Yes, said Mike. That's it exactly. I want to leave my situation, but my desire seems like it is at odds with itself. It seems selfish. What if I told you that you might be able to have both? Asked the angel with a smile. And that your wish for home is not selfish, but natural, and it is not in conflict with the desire to honor your purpose for being human. How? Please tell me how I can do this. An excited Mike now verbalized. The angel had seen Mike's heart, and now he honored him spiritually for the first time. Michael Thomas of pure intent, in order to determine if this can be your quest, I must ask you one more question before I tell you more. The angel moved away slightly. What is it that you expect to gain by going home? Mike thought this through. His silence would have been awkward during a normal human conversation, but the angel understood him completely, knowing that this was a sacred time for the soul of Michael Thomas. As time is measured on earth, Michael was still for 10 minutes or more, but the angel never moved or said a word. No feeling of impatience or weariness was displayed. Mike was beginning to realize that this entity was indeed timeless, without feeling the impatience that humans would. whose only reality was that of linear time. "I want to be loved and to be around love," was Mike's reply. "I want to feel peaceful in my existence." He paused. "I don't want to be subject to the concerns and trivial interactions of those around me. I don't want to worry about money. I want to feel release. I'm tired of being alone. I want to mean something to other entities in the universe. I want to know that I exist for a reason and do my part in heaven, or whatever you call it, to be a correct and appropriate part of God's plan. I don't really want to be a human as I have been. I want to be like you." He paused again. "That's what going home is about for me." The angel once again moved to the foot of the cot. "Then, Michael Thomas of pure intent, you indeed shall have what you strive for." The angel seemed to be taking on still more light, if that were possible. He absolutely glowed with white, which was now starting to be mixed with a golden hue. "But you must follow a path that is predetermined, and you must do it voluntarily, with intent and choice. Then, you will be rewarded with a trip home. Will you do this?" "I will," replied Mike. He felt the beginnings of a wonderful feeling that could only be described as a wash of love. The air was starting to feel thick. The glow of the angel was starting to creep into the cot and surround Mike's feet. Chills began to go up his spine, and he involuntarily started to shake with a fast vibration, the likes of which he had never felt before. It was almost a buzz. It was so fast. It traveled right up his body and into his head. His vision started changing, with momentary flashes of blue and violet showing up with great contrast against the intense white that he had been looking at since this had all started. "What is happening?" asked Mike fearfully. "Your intent is changing your reality." "I don't understand." Mike was terrified. "I know," replied the angel in a very compassionate tone. "Do not fear the integration of God into your being. It is a meld that you have requested, and it will suit your journey home." The angel backed away from Mike's narrow bed as if to give him room. "Please don't leave yet," exclaimed a still overwhelmed and fearful Mike. "I'm just adjusting myself to accommodate your new size," said the angel in a slightly amused way. "I'll leave only when we are complete." "I still don't understand, but I'm not afraid," Mike lied. Again the angel laughed and filled the space with a resonance that surprised Mike with its wonderful mirth and intensity of love. Mike realized that there were no secrets here, so he continued to speak. He had to know what this feeling was. Then the angel laughed. "What is it that happens when you laugh? It affects me inside somehow, and it's something I haven't felt before." The angel was pleased by the question. "What you hear and feel is an attribute that is purely from the God source," said the angel. "Humor is one of the only qualities that passes untouched from our side to your side. Did you ever wonder why humans are the only biological entities on Earth that laugh? You might think the animals laugh, but they are responding only to stimulus. You are the only ones who have the real spark of spiritual awareness that supports this full property. The only ones who can create humor from an abstract thought or an idea. Therefore, your consciousness is the key. Believe me, it is sacred. That is why it is so healing." Michael Thomas of pure intent. This was more explanation than the angel had provided up until this point. Mike felt that he might squeeze out some more gems of truth before this time passed. He eagerly tried. "What's your name?" "I don't have one." There was the silence again. A long pause. Oops, Mike thought. We are back to short answers. "How are you known?" Mike continued to probe. "I am known by all, Michael Thomas, and that I am known by all, therefore I exist." "I don't understand," Mike replied. "I know." Again the angel mused, but not at the expense of Mike. It was an honoring of Mike's naivete in a situation where he was not expected to know more, the way in which a parent might indulge a child who asked probing questions about life. There was love in everything the angel did or said. Mike knew he had to stop pressing and get to the point. "What is the path you speak of, dear angel?" Mike felt uncomfortable for a moment with his salutation of dear, but somehow it fit the personality before him. The angel was parental, brotherly, sisterly, yet had the personal feeling of a lover all at the same time. This was a feeling Mike would not soon forget. He longed to stay in this energy, and he dreaded the thought that it might come to an end. When you return to your reality, Michael, prepare your things for an adventure of many days. When you are ready, the beginning of the path will be shown to you. You will be required to journey to 7 houses of spirit, and in each house you will meet an entity somewhat like me, each with a different purpose. The path may contain surprises and even danger, but you can stop anytime you wish, and there will be no judgment about this. You will change along the way and learn many things. You will be required to study the attributes of God. If you traverse all 7 houses, then the door will be shown for you to go home. And Michael Thomas of pure intent, the angel paused and smiled. There will be great celebration when you open that door. Mike had no idea what to say. He felt a sense of release, but also a nervousness about journeying into the unknown. What would he find? Should he do this? Perhaps this was simply a dream that was all nonsense. What was real anyway? What you have before you now is real. Michael Thomas of pure intent, said the angel, again reading Mike's emotions. What you will return to is a temporary reality built just for humans to learn within. All Michael had to do was feel his doubt, and the angel knew it. Once again, Mike felt that he was in some way being violated by this new way of communicating, and in another way he was being honored. In a dream, Mike thought, you are in contact with your own brain, therefore there can be no secrets from yourself. Perhaps this is why it seemed appropriate to have such a conversation with this entity who knew what he was thinking. Besides, Mike was experiencing just what that angel said. He was beginning to feel quite comfortable in this dream reality, and he was not looking forward to going back to anything short of it. What now? Asked Mike hesitantly. You have given intent for the journey, so it is that you will return to your conscious human state. There are some points to remember along the way, however. Things will not always be as they seem, Michael. As you progress, you will become closer to the reality that you experience now with me. Therefore, you may have to develop a new way of being, perhaps a bit more. The angel paused, current than what you are used to, as you approached the door to home. Mike didn't understand what the angel was talking about, but he listened intently anyway. The angel continued. There is another question that I must now ask you, Michael Thomas of pure intent. I'm ready, replied Mike, feeling less than confident, but honestly ready to move ahead. What is the question? The angel moved closer to the end of the cot. Michael Thomas of pure intent. Do you love God? Mike was startled by the question. Of course he did, he thought. Why was this being asked? Mike answered quickly. As you can see my heart and know my feelings, you must know that I love God. There was silence, and Mike could tell that the angel was pleased. Indeed, it was the last word that Mike heard from the hidden lips of this beautiful creature, who obviously loved Mike a great deal. The angel reached out to Mike and moved his hand in such a fashion that it intersected Mike's throat. How could he reach that far? Immediately, Mike felt as though hundreds of fireflies had flown into his neck and were altering his persona. Mike felt no pain, but suddenly he vomited. Preparation. The journey begins. Hold his head to the left next to the tray, cried the nurse to the orderly. He's vomiting. The emergency ward was crowded that night, as is often the case on a Friday. This time the full moon also complicated matters. Although they might not possess a shred of belief in astrology or anything metaphysical, most hospitals had a tendency to put more personnel in the ER at this time of the month. Things seemed to occur that never happened at any other time. The nurse rushed out of the room to tend to another urgent matter. Is he awake? Asked a neighbor who had accompanied Mike into the ward. The white-coated orderly bent down to closely examine Mike's eyes. Yeah, he's coming out of it, the orderly replied. When you can speak to him, don't let him up. He's not only got a nasty head bump with a few stitches, but his jaw is going to be real sore for a while. The x-rays show that it was almost fractured. Good thing we were able to set the dislocation while he was out. The orderly moved out of the cubicle, an area separated by a curtain on a semicircular rod. On the way out, he pulled the curtain so that Mike and his neighbor were again alone. The many sounds of the emergency ward were subtle, but the neighbor could hear people and activities in the cubicles on each side of the one he was in. There was a female stab wound victim in the cubicle to the left, and to the right, an elderly man suffering from shortness of breath and a numb arm. They had been there almost as long as Mike had, about an hour and a half. Mike opened his eyes and felt a searing pain in his lower jaw. He knew immediately that he was awake. No more angel dreams, he thought, as the reality of the pain and the entire situation slowly became his reality. The fluorescent fixtures that bathed the emergency area in a bright, sterile light made Mike wince and close his eyes. The temperature in the room was cold, and Mike instantly felt the need for a blanket. None was offered. "You've been out for a while, buddy," said the neighbor, feeling a bit embarrassed that he didn't even know Mike's name. "They dressed your head and set your jaw. Don't try to talk." Mike looked appreciatively at the man who was bending over him, although still in a daze. He analyzed the features of the man's face. Mike recognized him as the tenant in the unit adjacent to his. The man took a seat to the side of Mike, who fell into a very deep sleep. When he awoke next, Mike knew he was in a different area. It was still and quiet, and he was in a bed. As he opened his eyes and tried to clear his foggy mind, he realized he was still in the hospital, but this time he was in a private room. It was well appointed for a hospital, Mike thought. His dreary gaze took him to the pictures on the wall and the ornate chair by the side of the bed. There was expensive sound-absorbent material on the ceiling, crisscrossing the room in small, elegant squares made slightly oblong by Mike's fuzziness. The fluorescent fixtures were still there, but turned off and semi-hidden within the pattern of the soft design. Most of the light was coming from a bay view window and a couple of incandescent lamps within the room, instead of a bare shelf on the facing wall holding up a television set. As in most hospital rooms, there was a finely finished armoire. The doors of the exquisite cabinet were closed now. The lamps had shades, much like in a fine hotel, and the shades matched the wallpaper. What kind of place was this? A private residence? Further examination with his eyes only, however, revealed the standard hospital air, gas, and electrical outlets available at various points in the room. Mike could also tell that there were a number of diagnostic tools behind him, one that was attached to his arm with some medical tape. It was beeping softly every few moments. With no one apparently around him, Mike started to analyze what had happened. Did they operate on his throat? Could he talk? Slowly, he brought his hand up to his throat, expecting to find massive bandages or even a plaster cast. Instead, Mike found smooth skin. He moved his fingers all over his neck, only to discover that all was as it should be. Mike gradually tried to clear his throat and was surprised to find his voice immediately. It was when he opened his mouth, however, that he realized where the problem was. Stinging red pain, enough to cause nausea, instantly stabbed Mike down behind his mouth and below his ears. "That's pain you can hear," thought Mike as he mentally made a note not to open his mouth so fast again. "Oh, we're awake, I see. We can give you anything you need for the pain, Mr. Thomas," said a whining but kindly female voice from the doorway of the room. "But you will recover faster if you find your own level of tolerance without the pills. Nothing is broken, you know. Your jaw just needs to be exercised back to normal." The nurse, wearing what could only be called a designer nurse's outfit, approached the bed. Not only was her outfit pressed and perfect, but it was obvious that she was very experienced. Above her pocket were several awards and experience badges. Mike spoke carefully through his clenched teeth, moving his jaw only slightly with each word. "Where am I?" he mumbled. "You're at a private hospital in Beverly Hills, Mr. Thomas." The nurse moved next to him. "You spent the night here after they brought you over from the emergency room recovery area. You are also scheduled to leave shortly, you know." Mike's eyes opened wide, and his face wrinkled with worry. He had heard stories of $2,000 and $3,000 a day bills for a stay in a place such as this. His heart began to race as he wondered how he'd pay for it all. "It's okay, Mr. Thomas," the nurse said reassuringly, reading Mike's expression. "It's all taken care of. Your father made all the arrangements, you know." "Oh, yeah, he paid for it all." Mike was quiet for a moment, contemplating how his dead father could have made any arrangements. Perhaps she only assumed it was his father, and it was really his neighbor? Mike mustered up the strength to speak through his barely moving mouth. "Did you see him?" Mike grunted. "See him? Oh yeah, some looker, your dad. Tall and blonde like you, with the voice of a saint. Had all the nurses a Twitter, you know." Just listening to the nurse, Mike knew she was from his home state in Minnesota. They all seemed to talk backwards there, often placing the subject of the sentence last, an odd thing that he had overcome shortly after moving to California. It made them sound like the character Yoda from Star Wars. She continued, "Paid for everything, he did, in cash no less. Don't you worry now, Mr. Thomas, and oh yes, he left a message for you, you know." Mike felt his heart leap even though he suspected that the so-called father was just his neighbor. The nurse's description didn't fit either one. The nurse had left the room to fetch the message. Not more than 5 minutes went by before she returned with a piece of paper that obviously had a typewritten message on it. "Dictated it, you know," said the nurse as she took a piece of folded paper out of a hospital envelope. "Said that his handwriting wasn't very good, so we typed it at the desk for you. Kinda hard to understand, if you ask me. Did he used to call you OP when you were a kid?" The nurse handed the paper to Mike, and he read it. "Dear Michael OPI, not everything is as it seems. Your quest begins now. Heal quickly and prepare your things for the journey. I have prepared the way home. Accept this gift and move forward. You will be shown the way." Mike felt chills run up and down his spine. He looked at the nurse with grateful eyes and held the paper to his chest. He then closed his eyes, as if asking to be left alone. The nurse got the point and left the room. Mike's mind raced with possibilities. "Not everything is as it seems," the note said. That's an understatement. He knew that his throat had been mangled and stomped on yesterday by a criminal who almost did him in on the floor of his apartment. He had felt every bone-crunching second of that horrible event. Yet, now there was no injury except a badly dislocated and reset jaw to contend with, along with some cuts and bruises on his face and head. These things would be sore for a while, but they were not incapacitating. Was this the gift? The idea that the angel vision could have been an actual event was not part of Mike's reality until he had read the note. If this wasn't the angel, then who? He simply didn't know anyone who had the money or who knew him well enough to give him anything, much less pay his substantial medical bill. Who else could know of the journey he promised to take? His body was vibrating with questions, and he was still reeling with doubt over the note and what it meant. When he received the final validation and smiled, the nurse had asked about being called OP. On the note it was spelled OPI, like a name, undoubtedly dictated letter by the angel who had paid his bill. It wasn't a nickname. The letters were initials. OPI of pure intent. Therefore, the salutation was, "Dear Michael of pure intent." Mike's smile turned into a laugh. It hurt a lot, but he continued to laugh, and his whole body shook with the mirth of the moment, until he was quiet and let the tears of joy also come. He was going home. The next few days were special. Mike left the hospital with some pills that would help him with the pain, but he found that he didn't need them. His jaw seemed to be healing with incredible speed, and he was able to exercise it gently. His speech was coming along fine. Eating, although a chore at first, came back to normal within a day or two. Through the process, pain simply wasn't a concern. There was stiffness, but it was bearable under the circumstances. Mike didn't want any pain pills to interrupt the high he was feeling about going on a spiritual quest. The cuts and bruises slowly vanished with time, although Mike was again astonished by how fast it was all happening. Mike quit his job over the phone. He had practiced doing it so many times in his mind. He really savored the act of terminating his connection with that awful job. He then called his friend John and explained as best he could that he would be leaving for an extended vacation and might not be back. John wished him well, but he expressed concern over Mike's secrecy regarding his plans. "Buddy," John had said persuasively, "you can tell me. I'm not going to do anything. What's going on?" Mike knew very well that John would not understand if he told him that an angel had appeared and had given Mike instructions, so he kept quiet. "I have a private journey to take," he told John. "It's meaningful for me." and he left it at that. Mike gave notice at his apartment and packed his things. He carefully separated his very personal belongings from his clothing and appliances. He didn't have much, but the things he cherished the most, the photos and the few books, he packed into 2 special cases. Mike realized that he could not take many clothes, so he packed the bare minimum for a very light journey, which also fit in the cases along with the photos and books. Mike invited his neighbor over, the one who had saved him, and gave the man some clothes, his television set, the bike he used to pedal to work, and various other meager belongings that he had accumulated over the past year or so. "If you don't want these," Mike had said, "then give them to charity." The neighbor seemed overwhelmed by the gesture, and he smiled broadly while pumping Mike's hand. Mike got the impression that the man had indeed needed much of what was offered. Cat, the fish, had been saved by the neighbor after calling 911, and it only seemed fitting that it should also go to him, seeing as how it was now in the man's aquarium anyway. "Goodbye, Cat," Mike had said with a smile while in the man's apartment. "Keep the faith." Cat didn't even look at him. He was busy with his new fish friends. It was the 5th day after Mike returned home from the hospital that he realized that he was approaching the end of his preparations. He didn't know exactly how to proceed, and he didn't know where he was going. It was evening and all was quiet. He knew that the angel would be aware when he was ready, and that tomorrow would be the start of something new. Mike felt that the reality of his journey was absolute. He owned the belief that he would be shown what to do. Everything that had happened in the last week justified the logic of his faith. Mike decided to review the precious belongings in the cases he was hauling along his spiritual trek. He opened them and painstakingly examined the items that he felt needed to be taken along. The first group of items consisted of the photos. The photo album was fairly tattered with time, and many of the aged pictures had been originally attached with the old-fashioned gummed corner mounts from the 50s. He opened the book carefully so as not to disturb the weaker mounts, and once again he felt the familiar feeling of melancholy when he gazed upon the wedding photo of his parents, the first photo in the book. He had found this and other personal photos of them after the accident, and he'd barely had the strength to look on them back then. There they were, very much in love, smiling at the camera, beginning their lives together. Their clothes looked funny to Mike, and it's the only time he remembered seeing his dad in a tie. Later, Mike found Mom's old wedding dress in the attic. He had asked a neighbor to pack it for him, since it was too painful. Mike was just a glimmer in their eye when the photo was taken, and their future was filled with expectation of good things. Mike stared at the photo for a very long time, finally speaking softly to it. "Mom and Dad, I am your only child. I hope what I am about to do will not disappoint you in any way. I love both of you and wish to see you soon." Precious moments went by as Mike turned the pages of the book that contained the lineage of his boyhood. He smiled often. There was the old farm, the occasional pictures of his friends along the way. He loved the photo of himself on the tractor when he was 6. What a treasure this album was. Mike felt that God would be happy to have him honor his parents and his upbringing by taking the photos on this special trip. What would eventually become of the album was unknown, but for now Mike felt that he could not leave these items behind. Then there were his books. He loved them. His Bible was worn thin with many readings, and it had comforted him so many times. Even if he didn't understand all of it, he felt its spiritual energy. It was carefully packed, and Mike could never leave it behind. Then there were his boyhood books that meant so much. The Hardy Boys, Charlotte's Web. These were just a few paperbacks that he continued to read periodically, each time remembering what he was doing at the age he first experienced those great stories and characters. Finally, the great adventure of Moby Dick when he got older, and the Sherlock Holmes series, and then some of his favorite poetry by obscure writers. All the books and the photos fit nicely into 2 satchels, and they could be carried easily, allowing him to also carry a medium-sized sack that could hold a snack or 2. Mike felt he was ready, so he lay down on the floor of his now bare apartment for the final time. He had a pillow, and that was enough. He was ready for the next day, and the excitement of starting his spiritual quest made sleep almost impossible as he turned over in his mind the things that had happened and the promise of things yet to come. Tomorrow would be the beginning of his journey home. Michael Thomas sealed his destiny with a simple cry, "I want to go home." And though he is prepared on the soul level, the journey only now leaves the safety of the vision. The stakes are impossibly high. In episode 2, The Blue House, Michael will receive his first vital tool from the Angel of Maps, the magic "You Are Here" map. Why does the most powerful tool on the path home only show one that your current location? Is this an angelic joke? More terrifyingly, the moment Michael accepts his gift, a dark, hideous entity that smells of hatred and does not need to eat or sleep begins to follow him, closing the distance. To gain the wisdom of the Blue House and learn how the You Are Here map is the most critical tool for your life, you must subscribe to Neo Insight right now and turn on notifications. The spiritual battle for Michael's soul and yours begins next.